Lisa Nalawak, and I am the owner and co-founder of Savvy Dog Design LLC. We're a graphic design and web design firm here in Tampa. We also do offer marketing consulting services. And I'm also a co-owner of Savvy Card LLC, which is a software company. We develop products that help people market themselves more effectively on the web, basically. So I act as marketing consultant for Savvy Card. I started in marketing communications at a company called Penwell Publishing in their sales department as an assistant. I learned a lot about marketing from the publishing perspective. After that, I moved on to high tech. I worked for larger companies like Real Networks and also a number of startups in the internet space in particular. So while there, I learned a lot about not just marketing and marketing communications, but also about the technology space, which I think was really important for me in terms of my background, because as the internet evolved, it's become the most important vehicle for delivering marketing messages and outreaching to customers that has been developed in the last 50 years, probably since television, I think. So it was really interesting seeing the evolution of the web as a place to market. And I remember when Facebook first came out, I checked it out, and it was one of those kind of aha moments when you just saw the potential for basically what we call trust marketing or referral marketing, when people help sell your product or service to other people they know, rather than a company or a service selling directly to somebody. When a company is looking to hire a marketing communications person or an agency or any other group that's going to help them with their marketing communications, they really need to look for a number of different things to make sure that particular person or group is well qualified to do what they need to do. Obviously, there is a need to be excellent at design. And so, art itself is a tool to help you market better, but it's not the thing that you need to evaluate when you're looking at a marketing communications company or evaluating them for your needs. I think the most important thing is, whether or not they have a really good sense of marketing and business. Whether or not they understand your company and your industry or able to do the research and understand from a top level down, because understanding strategic direction and understanding what your company's goals are collectively, not just for one particular piece, but into the future is vastly important in creating something that makes sense and actually works to meet a goal that you've set for it. There are a lot of designers out there who will design something because it looks cool. And while they might be really good and, create something that works with your brand, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an effective piece for what you're doing for marketing. So if there's not that marketing and business savvy behind everything that you do or that they do, you're just not going to get the best result. And I think a lot of firms make that mistake. When they're looking for designers, they go, wow, this guy is really good, or this firm does great visuals, but they don't think about, well, how successful was this? Did they design it in context with everything else we're doing at the moment? Did they leverage other programs we have going on? Did they ask intelligent questions? Did they do research on our industry and our company? Do they understand exactly what we're trying to accomplish here? If you find a group or a person that does those things, you've got a good person or a good group, and you should hire them. So a qualified commercial designer is going to have a pretty broad skill set when it comes to tools that they need in order to do their job. They're obviously going to be skilled in photo manipulation programs like Photoshop. Adobe probably owns the market, and in fact I know they own the market in the creative world for things like that. So any designer worth their salt is going to know that backwards and forwards. Illustrator is a vector art program, and there is a difference between vector and raster art. Photoshop is for raster, that means it's in little pixels. Vector art is very smooth graphics that are infinitely scalable, so they're great for signage or that kind of a thing. So they'll need to know that as well, because any commercial artist is going to need to use one or the other or both in any sort of piece that they're producing. They'll also need to understand typography. Their Adobe has this huge library of their own, but in addition to that, there's just, you Google fonts on the web and you'll get, you know, millions of pages of hits. I mean, there's so much out there. They have to understand how fonts play a role, because text isn't just text on a page, it's actually part of the design, and it plays a really large part in helping communicate what you're trying to do. So a good commercial designer will be really adept at that as well. On top of that, they need to understand, if they're in the web field, they need to understand, you know, motion graphics applications like Flash. Some are proficient in JavaScript, which is another non-Flash oriented animation technology that's really useful, particularly since companies like Apple on their devices don't really like Flash, and so you're kind of stuck unless you know how to animate and using JavaScript and that sort of thing. Then, of course, there's audio and video applications. So Adobe has products, that allow you to create interactive types of pieces where, you know, people can click on the screen on touch screens or interact on a website. And those include things like Flash and other technologies. So someone who's really proficient will also have that skill set. A lot of the times you'll find that people specialize in one area or the other. There's print, and then there's web, and then there's what we call interactive. So and then there's AV too, audio and video. So people who do sound, people who do video, that has a whole other suite of tools, and photography. So that's kind of the spectrum. And I think to find someone that has all of those skill sets is unreasonable. I think in order to find a really good person in any of those, you should look for a specialist. If you need to have someone in-house, pick someone that does the most, what your greatest need is. If it's print, find a good print designer and outsource the rest. In the design and delivery process, there's a difference between creative skill and production knowledge. So what do I mean by that? Creative skill is what it takes to actually create a piece of art or a marketing tool or whatever it is that you're creating in support of your marketing initiatives. Production is, well, how do you get that thing you've created out to people, and what platforms and vehicles are using, and how do you ready that asset for that particular distribution channel or vehicle. So having someone who, say, is a print designer, great. There's, you know, you think about, I'm going to put up an ad, or I'm going to create an ad, and you want to put it in a magazine, and then you want to put it on the side of a bus, and then you want to maybe place it on a backlit display somewhere in a mall. So for each of those different applications, there's actually a different process for getting the file ready to hand off to the vendors that then create those assets that are then displayed. And so an artist or a creative and a commercial designer needs to understand the difference between those different production processes and be able to adeptly alter the artwork to contain the right technical information so that those vendors can easily translate one to the other. I'm sure you've probably seen someone send a graphic over on an email and to use in a magazine, and when it prints out, it's all pixelated. And I can tell you with certainty that someone pulled it off the web, because they don't understand web is low resolution, 72 dpi. Print is high resolution, a minimum of 300 dpi or dots per inch. So what happens is you get something that is being displayed at 3 times the size it should have been, and so you get to see all these funny lines and, you know, pixelations, and that's why it's really important that someone understand the difference between, you know, the creative skill set and the production skill set, because they're completely different. In fact, there are a lot of companies that have internal, bigger companies, in their creative department, they'll actually have designers and then production artists. Designers create all of the assets, pass it off to the production artists, who then alter that art for whatever vehicle they're going to be using to produce it. All right, so we've talked a bit about what makes a good designer. We've talked a little bit about the production process, and we kind of tie it all together when we actually go through the actual process of creating assets. A website's a really good example of how all these different things kind of come together. Before you even start deciding or planning a website, there's so much research you have to do. You have to really, truly understand, first and foremost, the industry that, you know, the company is in. You have to understand what the competitive landscape is like. You have to understand exactly how they're planning on positioning themselves amongst their competition so that you can tell the right story. You then have to understand what the goal of the website itself is. I mean, a website can be all about raising money, like, for nonprofits. It can be about generating leads. It could be about just informing people or educating them on a particular topic. It could be about motivating them to buy things, online, about signing them up for a newsletter. I mean, there's a thousand different things that you can build a website for. So we have to really, before you do anything, a good designer and a good company, graphics company, will understand what they need to do in order to fulfill the business goal that the company has, and it requires understanding all of that stuff from a very high level. So once we understand that, particularly the goal, we'll sit down and we'll kind of storyboard out what is the user experience going to be. So I think one of the most critical mistakes that a lot of companies and commercial artists and creative types make is that they do the work as if they were the audience. And I think this is the hardest thing that people have to learn to do, is to think outside of that, to take the systems, the belief system and the value system of the target audience and apply that almost as a lens to focus their efforts and their energies in creating an experience that motivates that particular audience. So for a website, once we understand all that stuff I talked about previously, we then storyboard out this experience for the user. I mean, what are they looking for when they come to the site? In order to get them to do what you want them to do, how do you lead them down that path? What are the things you should be saying? What are the things you should be offering as carrots, to motivate them to do those things? And so we have to storyboard all that out and work with clients in order to understand that process and make sure that it makes sense, particularly as it relates to their existing business processes. We don't want to create a whole new type of workflow for them internally, if they have something already existing. So we have to make sure it all meshes together. So that in itself probably takes up a good half of the amount of time it takes us to build a website. Everyone kind of has this concept that, the coding part is the longest, and it really is not. It's probably one of the shortest. Once we understand all of that stuff I just talked about, the research, the goals, all of those things, and we've gotten the storyboard approved by the client, we can then actually start the design process. And that means actually creating wireframes that help us understand where things are going to go on a page, what kind of content that we need to have here. Does it need to be video? Should there be supporting text? I mean, lots of little questions that sound kind of menial, but in terms of the user experience, they're incredibly important in motivating the person to do the right thing. And so we'll map all of that out, and we'll get that approved by the client. And then after those wireframes are actually approved, then we come back and we start actually creating the graphics and the content for it. Once all of that is done, then we code. It's the absolute last step. So you can see that, a web design project is not just coding. It's this huge thing where coding just plays a little tiny part in the process. And that kind of process is applied to every type of commercial design project that's out there, whether it's, a billboard, whether it's a print ad, whether it's a direct mail piece or an email campaign. All of those things have to be taken into consideration and applied in using the same methodology to that project before it'll be effective. Some of our clients will come back to us and be a little sticker shocked, when they see the pricing that we present to them, in response to an RFP or that sort of thing. But what we're able to really communicate to them very quickly, is the reason for that. There's a difference between a freelancer and an agency that actually has a staff of people with different talents and skill sets. So with a freelancer, you're getting a single person with a particular type of skill. It might be a coder, it might be a designer, it might be someone who's a good marketing strategist, but it's incredibly rare that you're going to get one person with all of those things, particularly as it relates to like print production versus multimedia production versus web production. So those are all different skill sets. There are similarities, but yet lots of different tools, different understandings, that kind of thing. So when you go to an agency, a good agency, they'll have an actual team of people that have very specific specialties. Like, for example, with Savvy Dog, we have business and marketing experts, and then we have people who are experts in coding in different languages, which makes a big difference. We have people who are experts in print production, and we have people who are experts, in different types of design. We have people who are copywriters. We have people who are marketing strategists. So all of those people work together on a single project. And when you start to talk about having 4, 5, 6 people involved in any one thing, even if it's just an email blast, it becomes pretty apparent, that it's not going to be cheap, or not as cheap as a freelancer anyway, let's put it that way. And the result speaks for itself. You get what you pay for, and it really is true, particularly in marketing. The more expertise you have, the more clarity the team has on your objectives and goals, the better the end result. So it's a lot better to pay once more for something that is effective right out of the gate than trying 7 or 8 different people and getting moderate results. You end up spending way more for the same return than if you had just gone with the more experienced and more well-rounded team to begin with. So I've worked on both sides of the fence. I'm the owner of an agency and have been for the last 13 years, so I completely understand that side of the fence. But then prior to that, I was on the other side where I was hiring and managing vendors. And so I'll start there. The one thing that was really difficult for me was getting enough mind share, I think, from a lot of people. And that was kind of an issue that I had, from the very beginning. I felt that they weren't asking enough questions about my company, that they weren't really getting their fingers, down into the dirt and dirt under the fingernails kind of thing, in terms of understanding my business and my competition. And that was actually one of the reasons why I ended up founding SavvyDog, was because I just realized there was this kind of need for a company that was a little bit more hands-on than most of the companies I had dealt with. So, in terms of my experiences working on that side, I remember, having a video company doing a video for us for a trade show. And we were very specific about our goal and what we needed and that sort of thing. And they came back to me with this script that was completely and totally out in left field when it came to understanding our target demographic. And I just couldn't understand, as a creative agency that, their bread and butter was selling this stuff, how they couldn't, why they didn't do enough research, or maybe someone in upper management did, but the people working just didn't have a clue. And that kind of goes back to hiring the right people and having a good team in place. So that's one of my probably horror stories from that side of the fence. From an agency perspective, I think that the biggest challenge for us is always educating our clients on the process so they understand the value of what it is that they're buying. So I would say probably about 60% of our web business that we get is from people who have tried freelancers, who have tried other companies, and they've had a horrible experience. It's mostly freelancers. I'm not going and throwing all freelancers under the bus, because there are some really good ones out there, and if you're lucky enough to have one, that's awesome. But generally, the experience is that they'll pay someone, they'll be maybe half the price or a third of the price of an agency like mine, and they wait. 3 weeks go by, 6 weeks go by, a month and a half goes by, and things aren't moving. They try to call the person, they get voicemail. They finally connect with the person, they do the job, they get a bill for 3 times what they expected. I can go on and on with the number of, stories we've had that are absolutely the similar to that. Or maybe the person's really good and they do get the website fast, but it doesn't look great, it doesn't look professional. So in the creative industry, we have this triangle that we always refer to. There's value, which is basically price, turnaround time, and creative excellence. You can pick 2 out of the 3. It is exceedingly rare to find all 3 together. And that's really the truth of it. So if you want great quality stuff, at a decent price, you're going to wait. It's going to take people a little longer because that company's going to be really busy. If you want stuff really fast and you want it great, you're going to pay a lot more. So if you don't want to pay, you're going to suffer in some way, shape, or form on the other 2, just depending on who you're working with. Good characteristics of a strong working relationship between a vendor and a client would be a lot of collaborative sessions. So the more often a client is in touch with their agency and vice versa, the better the outcome. And it really just comes down to simple communication. I mean, it's kind of funny because people who manage, visuals and graphics, they're all in the art of that's communications. And the people who are selling these services, communication. So if people aren't talking, it just doesn't make any sense. This is all about this is what they do. So, our philosophy is always to be as proactive as possible with the people we're working with. I would so much rather over communicate and have someone tell me, hey, you can back off now, I trust you, rather than having someone call me and say, why didn't you tell me? So it really, really is important that the client and the agency are talking on a regular basis, because for both sides, it gives more transparency into the process so that the client has a better understanding of what's realistic in terms of expectations. It helps the agency understand where the client's coming from so that they can better tailor the experience for the client. Because, to be honest, not every client wants me calling them every day. Some don't. Some want me to call 3 times a day. So I want to provide the service, the level of service that my clients need. But I also have a threshold. There's so much I need to do in order to make sure the product is perfect, and I'll communicate that to people when we have that two-way dialogue going. It's absolutely critical that people work together in a collaborative way in order to ensure the best outcome. So one of the trends that in the last probably 10 years with design agencies has been the distribution of the workforce. And what I mean by that is, people are working in a virtual office. And it hasn't just been in design. I mean, it's been all over in all different industries. But it's particularly helpful for design for a couple of different reasons. I think first and foremost, if an agency doesn't have someone with a certain skill set, it's really easy to plug that person in. So whether it's, hiring a contractor or hiring someone on full time, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you can just integrate them right into your workflow. Supporting that are all of these wonderful platforms out there like Basecamp and Trello and other like Assembla. We've used that, but it's more of a ticketing system, but you can use it for project management too. It's in a Dropbox. Integrating all of that stuff makes it so much easier to work with people remotely. So it's actually no different anymore than sitting in an office building. People in offices Skype each other all day instead of like walking down the aisle to actually talk to someone. So it's exactly the same. And it just gives you so much more flexibility. The other awesome thing about that kind of an environment is because we're not co-locating people, or because we don't actually have the overhead of a large office building, we can keep our prices down and we can be more competitive. I mean, I think that's a huge advantage for agencies. And that's really important in the graphic design industry in particular, because there's a lot of pressure from overseas companies that do work for a fraction of what companies in the U.S. can charge. So having some way to mitigate your overhead is enormous for an agency. And clients shouldn't be scared of that kind of distributed workforce because of all of those advantages. When you are a designer or a member of a team that works collaboratively that way, it doesn't matter if you're at a trade show. It doesn't matter if you're on vacation. None of us are ever on vacation, but it doesn't matter, because if something happens and you're needed, it's no different than being in your office at home or in your co-located workspace or wherever it is that you work from. So we're able to maintain, I think, a higher standard of service because our people are always available, versus a company where the creative director goes on vacation for 3 weeks. What happens? And some people might step in, but the point is, he's suddenly just removed from the picture. Whereas in our scenario, it's, as long as we wouldn't have anyone that worked for us that wouldn't call us back, let's put it that way. But anyway, it just makes things much smoother for our clients. And again, it's better for us because we provide a higher level of service, and our clients really appreciate that. So when a company hires a creative agency or an individual to do creative work for them, the one thing they have to remember to do is to trust that person. it doesn't happen all the time, but more often than I think, than we'd like, certainly from a creative perspective, where the client will come in and, well, my wife likes pink, so can you make that pink? Or I really love dogs, so can you add a graphic over here? And it goes back a little bit to a point I made earlier. We're not designing for the client, we're designing for the target audience. So, and the client a lot of times isn't the target audience, and it's really hard. They're so close to everything, it's really hard for them to kind of back off and see everything from an objective third point. That's why they brought us in. They brought us in to give them that objectivity and to say, these are the things we need to do, and these are the assets we need to create that will help motivate your target consumer to do the things that you want them to do and increase your business. So if you knew all that stuff already, you wouldn't have hired me. So when I come in and I tell you we need to change this, or I tell you that we need to rework this, or I say, you might want to rethink this part of your marketing strategy, it's because we have that objective view and are trying to help you because we have the expertise in that area. So it's some clients are like, wow, yeah, that's really true, and other people still resist, but it's something that we constantly work towards. And getting back to being collaborative with our clients, that's part of the way that that we train them on how our process works and why it works. So that's probably one of our biggest challenges. And I find as we go along in our relationship that people eventually understand, and it's then that we start to realize, I think, the best results.